So on behalf of the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, welcome back to our webinar series exploring prescribed fire for forest management. Before we begin today, we acknowledge that the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point occupies lands of the Ho-Chunk and Menominee people. Please take a moment to honor the ancestral Ho-Chunk and Menominee land and the sacred land of all indigenous peoples. My name is Mike Tiller, and I serve on the Forestry faculty here at the UW-Stevens Point, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I think this is an excellent topic and very timely topic with using prescribed fire to manage tick populations and also ecological restoration through a lot of our ecosystems. Here in Wisconsin, tick-borne illness is a particular problem, and we know that all too well here at UW-Stevens Point at our Tree Haven campus. And we actually have a nice fire science study going on up there. And I really look forward to hearing what Sam has to say today in terms of managing ticks and quite possibly starting our own research here at UW-Stevens Point at our Tree Haven campus as well. Okay. So our invited speakers for this webinar series explore the many facets of prescribed fire related to forest and forest management. They are invited to provide their perspective and offer advice on how we can advance prescribed fire as a forest management tool in the future. We don't expect our speakers or anyone to have definitive answers about what the future will look like. Rather, we hope this series will provide insights, pose questions, and stimulate our collective thinking. Before I introduce our presenter, we have a few quick housekeeping items to review. Session recordings, additional resources, evaluation links, and information about continuing education will all be available on the website. We will do our best to ensure the recordings are posted within 2 weeks of today's session. To receive continuing education, you must complete the Microsoft form provided to you during the session, and this link will be posted periodically throughout the day in the chat. If you have any questions, please email wfc@uwsp.edu. The series is hosted by the Wisconsin Forestry Center and the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, Department of Forestry. An evaluation link will be provided later this morning, and we hope you all will provide feedback so we continue to improve our series. Although you are attending virtually, we will want to hear from you. Please type any questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The chat may not be monitored for questions, but our tech host is monitoring for content. We will do our best to address all questions and comments, but may be limited by time. Before we begin today, please say hi and let us know where you're listening from. And last but not least, we sincerely appreciate our sponsors for making this opportunity free for all attendees. Today, we would like to highlight our sponsors, our series platinum sponsor, the National Wild Turkey Federation, and our series gold sponsors, the Ruffed Grouse Society, the American Woodcock Society, and the Nature Conservancy. Okay, and now it's time to welcome our presenter. Sam Gilbard is a PhD student in Dr. Vander Yacht's Applied Forest and Fire Ecology Laboratory at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. Sam's research primarily explores how the One Health approach can be employed to address problems that exist at the interface of human well-being, animal health, and environmental conservation. Currently, he is focused on studying on how fire management interacts with tick populations in the Atlantic coastal plain pine barrens. Sam holds a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Studies and History from Gettysburg College and a Master's of Science in Conservation Medicine from the Cummins School of Veterinary Medicine at Tufts University. He has previously worked as a fire effects monitor for the National Park Service at Sequoia Canes National Park, the Shenandoah National Park, and Cape Cod National Seashore. He is currently affiliated as an AD with the Green Mountain and Finger Lakes National Forest. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Sam. Thank you, Sam. Welcome.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate everyone for taking time out of their busy day to join us here at the webinar. And I would also really like to thank the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and all the sponsors for giving me the opportunity to come speak to you all today about fire management and its relationship to tick populations, especially with the potential ability for that management to hopefully make a difference in public health and moderate the risk of tick-borne illnesses. And so, with that being said, again, I thank you all for joining us, and thanks the hosts. And yeah, today we'll be talking about prescribed fire and ticks. So before we begin with the content of the presentation, I just wanted to take a moment to sort of prime everyone's minds with some guiding questions that I hope to address through this presentation. Important points that I'd like you to be mindful of during this talk. So first, what are tick-borne illnesses and why are they a significant public health threat? So thinking about sort of the harm that is inherent in this problem for public health. Next, I would like us to take a step back from that and consider how fire management could theoretically moderate incidence of tick-borne disease. And that involves looking at the ecological side of the disease process. Look at tick-borne illness not as a health problem in the strict sense, but also as an ecological problem. And finally, I would like us to think about how we could theoretically potentially utilize prescribed fire to actually realize those effects. That is, move theory to action. As an academic, I always talk all these big ideas, and we talk about the theory and it's all the stuff. But in my opinion, all the theory of the world is less valuable, has less value if it doesn't actually bring conservation action. So to talk about how we can use this idea to get more acres burned, to promote that fire-dependent, disturbance-dependent ecosystems that all of us value so much. And I should note that as I work on the East Coast, a lot of my material is going to be framed around just what I know, what my dissertation research is around, which are the North Atlantic coastal pine barrens. However, this research certainly has applicability to similar ecosystems, such as jack pine barrens and oak-dominated savannas, as well as other disturbance-dependent systems. So first, ticks and tick-borne disease. And so it may come as a surprise to some folks that there are actually a lot of different ticks out there. Globally, there are about 867 species of ticks, maybe a tick off here or there, that are globally recognized. And around 49 of these have been documented as infesting humans or, seeking blood meals on humans in the continental United States. Now, not all of these are common. Some of them are, very, very much one-off incidences. There's a lot of ticks are very, very specific about their hosts. They like one specific animal species, and they're very picky eaters, we can say. Then there's others that are more, they're hungry and they don't care what they eat. And of the ones that are very hungry for humans, the most common medicinally important species in the U.S., eastern U.S., in their associated diseases include the black-legged tick. It's often called the deer tick, which is Ixodes scapularis. And this carry pathogens that cause diseases such as anaplasmosis, babiosis, hard tick-borne relapsing fever, Lyme disease, as well as Powassan encephalitis. Another tick species that is very, very common in the southeast, especially, but moving up north, is the Lone Star tick, Amblyomma americanum. And that can cause human monocytic ehrlichiosis, Heartland virus disease, as well as the bourbon virus disease. It can also cause an allergy to red meat and other mammalian products. It's called alpha-gal syndrome. So some folks who get bit by the Lone Star tick become allergic to red meat, which is quite scary for carnivores in the crowd. And then we have the dog tick, or as I was discussing before the presentation, also known as the wood tick, Dermacentor variabilis. And two of the big pathogens causing disease, two of the big diseases this can be transmitted by the pathogens include Rocky Mountain spotted fever, as well as tularemia. And importantly, such illnesses are a huge and increasing source of morbidity and mortality across the range of Eastern North America. For example, one analysis found that the reported incidence of tick-borne illness doubled over the period of 2004 to 2016. So we're seeing more illness incidents, whether that's a consequences of us looking for them more, so we're finding them more, or just increasing. It's hard to say, but it's becoming, we're at least more aware of what is a big issue. And these increases are coming along the sides of regional increases in tick populations, expanding ranges of tick populations, often associated with land use changes as well as oscillations in climate. One of the biggest things to note here is the Lone Star tick. Now, while from looking at Wisconsin, the two big tick species you have in your neck of the woods are those the Ixodes scapularis, as well as the wood tick or dog tick. So those are, looking at some of the Wisconsin public health sites, those are the big ones you all are confronting with. However, Lone Star tick is something that I would like to throw out on your radar because it is expanding north. Now, some people think that it's reclaiming previous range. Others think it is, invading. But what's not, regardless of its prior presence or not, it is being seen more and more in the north. And that includes in Wisconsin. So, forward, which is I learned is the motto of Wisconsin, to the Badger State. So these Lone Star ticks are moving up north. And I would encourage folks to be mindful of that because, as I said, they can be the source of diseases that significantly impact folks' lives. The alpha-gal red meat allergy it can cause life-threatening illness. It can also change people's daily routine. There was an article in one of my hometown papers a couple weeks ago talking about how on I think Martha's Vineyard they're developing whole new meat-free menus for people that have been affected by this because the Lone Star tick is so ubiquitous there. So keep your eye out for Lone Star ticks. Now that we know about tick-borne disease, we can start to conceptualize that disease not as just a health issue, but as a ecological process. And by understanding it as an ecological process, we can begin to tease apart how fire management might be able to play a role in moderating incidence of tick-borne disease through reductions in ticks. So first, the first life stage for ticks is an egg. So a pregnant female tick will fall off the host that is feeding on and lay a bunch of eggs on the ground in the leaf litter. After those eggs hatch, they will hatch into a larva, which are the first life stage of ticks. Ticks have various life stages, 3 life stages, not including the egg, for them to reach full reproductive maturity and complete their life cycle. Larvae are born. And importantly about larvae, many pathogenic microorganisms that cause diseases in humans and other hosts, they are not transmitted what we call transovirally. So this is not always the case, but in many cases, mama tick does not pass the pathogen on to baby tick. There are some exceptions for sure, but in most cases, the larvae are born without those pathogenic microorganisms. They have to get those microorganisms from blood meals, from hosts. And so the first blood meal of larvae is often on small mammals like rodents. I'm a botanist, so I don't know many small animals like mice, shrews, squirrels, organisms like that. And often those are great reservoirs for pathogenic microorganisms. So the larva will have a blood meal and it will become infected with that pathogenic organism. It will then the stage will then molt into a nymphal tick, which are kind of the teenage ticks. They're the most angsty of all tick life stages, and those nymphs will also be usually infected through transstadial infection of the larva will go to the nymph and they will maintain that infection status. As that wrong button, that nymph will then try to get a blood meal. Can be on a small mammal as well, but they also are often drawn towards larger animals like humans, deer, other large animals. And upon having a blood meal on those organisms, the disease can be the pathogen that causes the disease can be transmitted, and those hosts can become infected and display signs of disease. They will then molt into adults. The adults can have, usually will have that pathogen still retained. The adults can have another blood meal. They need a blood meal usually, especially the adult females, in order to have a new clutch. And in that blood meal, they can infect the host with that pathogen again. And then the female after that host will lay her eggs, and the whole process starts again. And so when we want to impede the flow of a disease in humans or other animals, we want to figure out how we can break the cycle of transmission of that disease process. Traditionally, when we think about, stopping disease, we think about go on antibiotics. Let's stop the infection in the host itself. Well, by killing off the pathogenic organism, which will stop the disease. There is also talk about sometimes vaccines. We talk about using, proper personal protective equipment. So, wear pants. Sometimes those pants are treated with various arachicides, and sometimes we also talk about, various kinds of host management. And so, if we decrease the natural host, if we decrease hosts, we could maybe decrease, the size of tick populations. Although there's also some sense that if we add more diversity to the hosts, that could dilute the ability of hosts to become infected with infect the vector ticks with pathogenic microorganisms. So sometimes that's increasing host diversity. Sometimes that's culling hosts. Host management, though, is another potential thing. There is no silver bullet, though, to all these things. It's all integrated. And one of the things that we don't traditionally think about in terms of managing ticks is we forget to think about the ecological, abiotic, and biotic environments that the ticks live in. That leaf litter, that duff, and that is something that fire is really good at affecting. And so by affecting that leaf litter and duff, as well as affecting ticks directly, we can start thinking about how fire can affect tick survival. And tick survival is correlated with risk of exposure to tick-borne pathogenic organisms that cause tick-borne disease. So now, how does fire affect tick survival? So fire can cause direct mortality of ticks. So, ticks, when it gets, fire is hot, that's groundbreaking research right there. I just told you all, you're first to know fire is hot. And when exposed to the high temperatures, there's often pretty substantial tick mortality. Additionally, that fire will consume leaf litter, duff, and change the structure of the forest to decrease the amount of refugia and cover. Now, that's important because ticks are really sensitive to desiccation-related mortality. When it gets hot and dry, ticks die. So ticks, when they are challenged with hot and dry conditions, ticks retreat to refugia like leaf litter and duff, which holds moisture, in order to sort of ride out the hostile abiotic storm. And when those leaf litter and duff is not present, and they are directly exposed to those abiotic inhospitable microclimates, you can see elevated mortality when they're challenged with heat, freezing temperatures, low humidities. They'll dry out and kill the ticks. And we can also flip all that on its head. We can think about what happens when we don't have fire in these systems. So no fire means that there's no direct mortality from fire on ticks, as well as a further accumulation of leaf litter and duff, as well as denser forest understories, denser canopies. Denser canopies prevent they increase shading, decrease temperature. Same as all the canopy for the ticks, all the herbaceous and shrubs. So all those together, as they accumulate, that increases refugia and only strengthens the habitat of the tick against those hostile abiotic conditions. And so fire affects tick survival. Sort of the big picture is fire can affect ticks both directly and indirectly. So now I would love to say that I'm the first one to come up with ticks and fire, but that just wouldn't be looking at ticks and fire, but that just wouldn't be the case. There is a lot of history to build off of for my own current work, looking at how other researchers and ecosystems have looked at tick-borne illness as it relates to fire, tick populations as it relates to fire. However, a glimpse into the literature can, on the surface, reveal what are somewhat contradictory results. Some studies have suggested that fire can actually promote the size of tick populations. Other studies have determined that fire really has a negligible impact on tick populations. And some studies have found that fire management can really impede tick populations, lower tick population size. First, I would just like to note that the Great Lakes region is maybe with some West Central Illinois notwithstanding, really haven't been much research on ticks and fire to my knowledge in your region, which is hearing about your potential prescribed fire work up at your at the forest you have, and sounds like it could fill a ecological gap that is very much needed in this field. And so definitely excited to hear about that. Now, what all of these different, so while on the surface you may think that these are all similar studies, we have to think about how they differ, and they differ in terms of the fire application at different spatial and temporal scales. And so some of these fires are more close. Some of these studies have fires that are more closely aligned with, we would think about fire management, sustained fire, frequent fire, fire that accomplishes specific objectives, and others do not. The fire in my reading through this literature, the fires that are more closely associated with those historic patterns, with that long-term relationship scale, long-term landscape scale fire, when we look at those, we tend to see pretty significant decreases in tick populations. So, for example, in Georgia and Northwest Florida, a researcher found that in non-burn areas, there were almost 48,000 ticks they collected over the course of their study, and compared that to the burn treatments, where they only collected 43 ticks. So I don't have to run the NOVA or the t-test or generalized linear mixed models to tell you that 43 is a lot smaller than 47,000. Don't tell the stats professors I said that. So that's a pretty substantial decrease that we see there from that study, which we couldn't recommend more. It's fantastic work. And the authors of that study followed up their research by looking at, well, what is the chance of encountering a tick that is infected with a pathogenic microorganism in those burn versus unburn areas? And they found through their work that there was a 98% chance decrease in the risk of encountering a tick that has a pathogenic microorganism in those burned areas. They didn't find that there was a difference in ticks with pathogens in the burn versus non-burned areas, but they did find that there was a lower risk of encountering those ticks in the burned systems. Now, what this tells me is that if you want to put fire management into a system that will stop ticks, or could promote ticks, or kind of either way, you really have to get the fire regime right. You really have to get those patterns right, which where prescribed fire comes into play, because what you choose to do for your fire management can really affect how ticks respond to those fires. So now I'd like to sort of talk about some research in progress, my own work in association with a lot of fantastic folks here in New York. My major professor, Dr. Andrew Vanderyacht, my two committee members, Dr. Brian Ledette and Dr. Martin Dovchek as well, and partners at places like the Albany Pine Bush and Brookhaven National Lab. We'll talk about that in a second. So, ticks and fire at the Atlantic coastal pine barrens is what my dissertation is on. So first, especially because the Atlantic coastal pine barrens are a little bit distant from Wisconsin, I'd like to spend a little bit talking about them here, although I will say that there are some, similarities with the jack pine systems, in a way with these systems. Both are, pine barrens. Funny because when I'm doing my research, sometimes I come across a pine barren article, read it, be like, oh, this is jack pine. Still interesting, but not as directly relevant as some other stuff. Very cool plant though. So the Atlantic coastal pine barrens, these are characterized by a open canopy, about 10 to 60% canopy closure of pitch pine, which is Pinus rigida. It is a very, very fire tolerant species. It can have serotinous cones, which are cones that open in the presence of heat. Among pines, it is one of the only species that can sprout epicormic growth, as well as it can sprout. It can sprout from the root collar, which is pretty unique among pine trees. So it is a very, very thick bark as well. So pitch pine is adapted to fire. In the absence of that fire, the pine barrens are susceptible to encroachment by more shade and moisture tolerant tree species and other plant species, a phenomenon that has been termed mesification. But burning, using fire, can maintain the characteristic structure, so the open canopy and other characteristics, as well as promote a diverse assemblage of herbaceous species that are often seen in these open disturbance-dependent systems. And the Atlantic coastal pine barrens, the group, according to NatureServe, is a globally imperiled ecosystem. It also forms the northernmost end of one of the world's biodiversity hotspots, the Atlantic coastal plain hotspot. And so it is a biodiverse and very important species to preserve. And the leveraging point for these systems is fire. Fire is what makes the system go, at least historically. All right, so now to the research. We are sampling for ticks at these sites that have burned. In the sites I've been doing my research at are Brookhaven National Laboratory, which is on Long Island. It's about an hour and a half, depending on traffic, east of New York City. Brookhaven National Laboratory is a fantastic place. They've won like 7 Nobel Prizes there for all kinds of fancy physics and chemistry work. I just go out of the woods and look at plants and ticks, but it's a cool site. And also doing work at Albany Pine Bush in upstate New York. And Albany Pine Bush is probably one of the best, if not the best, example of Atlantic coastal pine barrens, albeit this is an inland version, currently existing. When I first went there, I thought I knew pine barrens. It blew my mind for what a pine barren could be. It was fantastic. And if you ever find yourself in New York, hop on 90 and head close to Massachusetts and check out the Albany Pine Bush. Cannot recommend it enough as a aside. And so I've broken up our sampling efforts into 3 different, fire treatments. So we have our control areas, which haven't burned at all. We have our infrequent fire areas, which have burned once in the past 15 years. And then I have my frequent fire treatments, which have burned at least once in the past 15 years and at least once in the 15 years prior to that burn date. So frequents have repeated the fire, and relatively recently, infrequent 1 fire, control, no fire. And I kind of drew those treatments categories by looking at the surrounding literature on pine barrens and fire. Frequent fire can sort of get us towards where we want to for self-sustaining disturbance-dependent Atlantic coastal pine barren. We are collecting those ticks via dragging and identifying them to species, life stage, and sex if the tick is an adult. We are recording ambient meteorological conditions. And we are retaining ticks for future pathogen testing. Actually, we're getting started with some of the preliminary pathogen testing right now, so I'm very excited about that. I'm a little nervous because that means I have to go into the lab and get out of the woods, which I'm scared about because I'm more of a woods person. Wish me luck. And we're also assessing community structure of the areas we find these ticks. So that means we're getting the overstory, we're getting the diameter, breast height, and species of overstory, midstory trees. We're assessing understory composition, measuring canopy cover, as well as measuring leaf litter and duff in those systems to get a sense of what is the refugia like. And what we're finding is pretty cool, in my opinion. Now, should caveat that this analysis is very much a work in progress. I have not done robust modeling on it yet. That's the next step. Once I complete my candidacy qualifying exams at the end of the month, then I get to start modeling. But we're looking at the mean abundance by treatment presents some telling signs that I think there's something here. So starting at the Albany pine bush. So the y-axis looks at the average number of ticks per 160 meters. So 160 meters are the size of my sample units. So I collect sampling efforts. So I collect, we drag 1 meter we drag a 1 meter cloth fabric for 160 meters, collecting ticks as we go. And so that's a standardized metric. We're just using that to normalize tick abundance. And on the x-axis, you'll see the categories, frequent, infrequent, and control. And so for adult and nymph ticks that we found at Albany Pine Bush in summer 24, we found that there was a significant decrease in the fire treatments relative to the control in areas that have burned. And so those error bars represent 95% confidence intervals. And they were found to be significantly different with non-parametric Kruskal-Wallis testing. So there were, on average about 6 ticks per 160 meters in the control, and 1 to less than 1 in the burned areas. Now, this past summer at Brookhaven National Laboratory, a similar trend appeared where there were significantly fewer ticks in the burn treatments relative to the control. However, I will note that there's a lot more ticks we found here in general. So we were pulling about 50 ticks per sample in the control areas, and then 15 to 20 on average from the fire treatments. It was a very big tick year this summer. There were so many ticks in the New York City area, it made the New York Times. I kid you not. Made research difficult in some instances, but I also think it highlighted the trends that were there. And so what this shows me is that this was also found to be significant with 95% confidence intervals, with Kruskal-Wallis non-parametric testing. And so with both of those sites, the picture emerges that we do see significant reductions in tick abundance with fire versus no fire. Now, furthermore, looking at those areas that have burned frequently, a pretty interesting trend does begin to emerge. So in stands that have burned frequently, I plotted the years since fire on the x-axis and the amount of ticks that were collected per 160 meters on the y-axis. And what I saw was that as the time since fire increased, the amount of ticks that I found also increased. Conversely, as the more recent the fire was, the fewer ticks we found. And if you look back at the amount of, the average number of ticks that we found sorry, 1 second. We see that the average amount of ticks in those control areas are about 50 ticks. And so if we wanted to maintain, lower than 50 ticks, we could think about how many years we want to burn. We want to burn for that. And so in terms of future analysis and work, stuff that remains to be done, we want to do some pathogen testing on the ticks that we collected, as well as correlate vegetation response to fire. So look at the vegetative patterns that we see in terms of both, classes like forbs, graminoids, trees, as well as look at what are how much biodiversity, what species richness are we vegetatively, are we associating with that fire? Oh, sorry, I forgot to click the button. We also are interested in considering how landscape scale impacts fire. And so landscape scale impacts are fire because, burned areas and their denizens do not exist in a vacuum. And so we want to understand how those landscape scale metrics of, how does the burned area nest within, larger landscapes, including unburned areas? What does that affect? How does that affect ticks? So for example, while fire can cause really high mortality in ticks directly, you will see ticks come back to the areas after fires. And, ticks don't have a very large, they're not very mobile organisms in the sense that on the landscape scale, but some of the hosts they have are large. They're able to move far. So, for example, deer. Deer can move pretty far, and deer are often big hosts for ticks. Deer will be attracted to burned areas for browse, and they will deposit their ticks in there. And the theory is that those harsh abiotic conditions that we create via fire can then cause environmentally derived mortality for those ticks. But understanding that landscape scale pattern of deer is important to understanding how fire impacts ticks indirectly. And so we are very interested in our exploring those that kind of thing as well. But now, as this is this is a prescribed fire webinar, I did want to sort of talk about how we can take theory and turn it into action. And what that entails is how can we operationalize fire management to reduce tick populations? And my answer to that is through prescribed fire, whether that be through in places like maybe the West Coast, allowing lightning starts to burn, or in more humid climes, utilizing prescribed burning to meet those research objectives. And here, I would like to have us note that it's important to balance. If we want to have ticks as a research objective, we want to balance that with other objectives, such as if you want to promote a specific endangered species, if you want to reduce wildfire risk, if we want to promote some kind of game species. We have to balance our tick reduction as an objective with all those other objectives, like you would for any other kind of objective, whether it's decrease litter presence by 50% and increase pine seedling regeneration by 25%. You could throw in ticks as an objective there. And as that, you would want to, what I would recommend is striving to encourage tick mortality as an explicit objective in burn prescriptions. And you could sort of think about how we could think about doing that. We'll talk about in the next couple slides. But those prescriptions, those objectives, with them being explicitly written in our burn plans, in our management plans, could then influence burn day operations. And we can maximize the potential effect of our prescribed fire on ticks by keeping that focus from the start, like we would with any other kind of objective. And so the first way I would say that we can think about how we can use fire to moderate the size of tick populations is by reining in that tick refugia. And so first, we can think about how can we have fire that consumes the most refugia that is there. And one of the first things that came to my mind when I was making this presentation was, well, if we have some kind of smoldering fire with like a higher residency time, that's going to sit there, it's going to cook, and it's going to really consume the leaf litter that's there. So a backing fire with a higher residency time, maybe that is something that could cause more leaf litter and duff to be consumed, leaving more bare conditions, which can then, reduce the refugia that ticks have available to them. The next thing I would say is maybe we should consider, KBDI. It's not that we don't consider KBD already because, we don't want to burn when it's too droughty or it's too wet because, either the fires can go out of control or, we're not going to get much burning. But if we can, maybe frame, if we burn on a day when the leaf litter is more dry than not, within reason, maybe then we can see the ability of our leaf litter and duff to more thoroughly consume. And so if we want to have a backing fire with high residence time, we can maybe pair that with a day with very optimal, leaf litter and duff burn conditions, ground level burn conditions. Maybe then we can have a fire that does that substantially influences the understory to reduce refugia and thus encourage environmental related mortality by microclimate conditions. All right, so next we can invest in the intensity of a fire as well. And so higher temperatures can promote mortality. That has been, looked at experimentally in peer-reviewed literature. So, for example, researchers working in the southeastern United States explored how the Gulf Coast tick, Amblyomia maculatum, which I should note is a very, very desiccation-tolerant species. It is a large tick. It is pretty well adapted to surviving challenging abiotic hostile conditions. The researchers, they experimentally exposed ticks to temperatures ranging to various degrees of temperature. And what they found was that ticks that were exposed to to temperatures of like 302 to 329 degrees Fahrenheit for just around 15 seconds, they 100% mortality in those ticks. In ticks that were exposed to lower temperatures, but for a longer time, you still had very substantial mortality. And these were in a lab setting. They did field research as well that showed very high mortality in ticks that were placed in natural settings that were subject to prescribed fire. And so, I'm not a physicist or a chemist, but I think that our fires can get a little hotter than that temperature, which means that, but just to show that, an intense fire can be thought of as a way to at least, knock tick populations back, in the immediate presence. So a fast moving, intense head fire, maybe you don't get that, you don't get that smoldering that can kill refugia, but you can maybe get that, accumulate all those fine fuels the ticks are questing on and really knock back the population as is. Now we can also think about how we can opt for openness in our burn areas, and this can involve using fire surrogates to increase the efficacy of fire in achieving desired structural characteristics. So, for example, we can do some mechanical. We can do some mechanical. We can use some overstory thinning, decrease the density of a stand, fire those areas. And create areas that have, some barren spots, some low growing shrubs, areas that really allow heat to accumulate and, allow for direct solar radiation, allow for increased temperatures, lower humidity, really creating these barren conditions that ticks are known to not tolerate well because of their physiology. And so combining fire surrogates into burn planning can have benefits in terms of other types of ecological restoration needs. For example, a species in the East Coast that is of conservation concern and it's also very much societal value is bobwhite quail. Bobwhite quail, like these mosaic habitats, they require mosaic, and using silvicultural means plus fire to create that mosaic is very effective. Creating those open bare spots where they can do bird stuff. I'm a botanist. I'm not entirely familiar with the bird stuff, but it also creates great conditions for rare plants to germinate in, which is another benefit. So I'd like to highlight how other objectives can be concurrently realized with reductions in tick populations potentially, but we should be mindful of that. We don't want tick population reduction to get in the way of other objectives, just as we wouldn't want other objectives to promote tick population size. It's all about finding that middle ground, that balance, finding the correct prescription. Like any other kind of prescription, the proper dose matters. The proper dose to the prescription matters. So if we can think about the dosage of medication, kind of like the frequency of fire on the landscape. And the frequency of fire on the landscape can be, tied, how frequent a fire on the landscape is can be tied to either our research objectives or resource objectives. I'm an academia now, I say resource, or the historic fire return intervals of those stands, those areas. And in my opinion, those often overlap. And just sort of highlighting the frequency side of things, looking at the Albany pine bush data again, those areas that had frequent fire that were in accordance with historical patterns, as well as that met their resource objectives of preserving pine barrens, especially in pursuit of the restoration of carnivore blue butterflies, which is a federally endangered species that Albany pine bush stewards there. I know there's a lot of robust populations in the Great Lakes as well, but we have a thriving little population in Albany too because of the management that is done at Albany. And so that frequent fire, which is for those research objectives, in congruence with historic fire return intervals, we're seeing a pretty substantial decrease in tick population size in those areas. And I'd like to sort of think about sort of get on a podium here. And when we think about fire management, it's not just a one burn and we're out type of thing. Oftentimes these systems require repeated fires, frequent management. I like to describe it as if someone is diagnosed with high blood pressure, they're sick, and their doctor gives them high blood pressure medication. If they keep taking that regularly in accordance with the prescription, they're more likely to get healthy. But if you have someone who is assigned high blood pressure medications because they're sick, they take it a couple times, one or two, and they feel better. So I feel better. I don't need the rest of my medications. Well, they stop taking the medications and their blood pressure then skyrockets. And then, you have me coming on an ambulance to take you to the hospital. It's the same with fire. It's a prescription because it's a medicine for the land. That medicine needs to be taken at the correct dosage. If we sort of lose that dosage, we lose, the benefits of that treatment for the land. And now, with that being said, I'd like to throw a shameless plug for a recent publication that I was fortunate enough to lead author with a fantastic group of folks that was published in Bioscience on how we could use that One Health methodology to frame fire management to create such kind of benefits. And so I have a QR code here, and if you would like a copy of it, I'd be more than happy to send it to you. If you shoot me an email, I can send you the PDF. So now I'd love to take any questions if we have time.
Appreciate that. That was really informative talk. And I like the dose part. And I think, I know you're an EMT, and I've been one for a long time. The therapeutic dose, right? How much fire we keep on the landscape to meet our objectives. I really like that part of that. So, Brina, yeah, I do have a couple questions here. The first one that one of our attendees asked is how does seasonality of fire affect tick survivability rates?
Sure, that's a fantastic question. And so we can think about this in terms of two different sides of things. We'll first start with looking at the tick side of things directly. So ticks, like other organisms, have a distinct phenology. So that often differs based on the life stage. And so nymphal ticks are often most active at different times of year than adult ticks. And the same goes with larvae. And so timing up that fire with peak tick phenology in terms of seasonality can realize more substantial reductions in tick populations. So if you burn when all the nymphs are active, well, then you're going to have much fewer adults later. If you burn when all the ticks are senesced, maybe then you're not going to get as much of a robust difference. And the same thing can also be thought about the life cycle of the plants are burning. A lot of species, if you burn during the dormant season of the plants, they may be top killed, but the plant still has a ton of resources invested in their roots to respond vigorously to that. Whereas if you burn during the growing season, that plant has drawn those resources from its root bank, and now it has invested those resources in foliage, in flowers, and whatnot. And so if you top kill that, you're going to create a more depauperate understory. And so there's benefits and pluses and minuses to both of those depending on your objective. So if you want to, we have a lot of pine barrens. We have a Oaks are great. I love oaks. I'm an oak guy, but oaks are really encroaching in some pitch pine systems. And if we don't really stress those oaks out, they really outcompete the pines. And so maybe then we opt for a growing season fire to really knock back those oaks relative to dormant stuff season fire, where they'll just coppice like crazy. And that affects tick survival based on how thick it is and stuff.
And then, actually kind of riffing on that too a little bit, what you just talked about in terms of tick life stages and seasonality. Is there a particular season that their life stages, the ticks are a bit more vulnerable throughout the year?
So I think that in general, the smaller the tick, the more vulnerable it is to desiccation-related mortality. Larger ticks are more resilient to surviving drier conditions. So the larvae and nymphs are typically more susceptible to death via low temperatures or high temperatures or low temperatures, I guess, in low humidity. If I was to pick one that I would say is a good thing to focus on, so larvae typically don't have, always an exception. Don't get me wrong. Larvae typically do not carry pathogenic microorganisms because of that transovarial transmission that we talked about before. So larvae, they're itchy when they bite you. Lone stars can give you alpha gal, but in terms of pathogenic microorganisms, larvae are often, lower frequency and lower concern. Adults, they've had 2 blood meals, and so they have double the chance of picking up a pathogen. But adults are really big and they're easier to spot. And so people oftentimes, are able to remove adults before, it varies by pathogen and disease, but oftentimes removing a tick quickly reduces the chance of contracting a infectious dose of the pathogen. Nymphs, they have had the ability to get a blood meal, which could carry a pathogen, and they're also much smaller than adults. And so nymphs are often considered sort of the most medically important life stage to consider because they're small and they have a higher likelihood of becoming infectious with the pathogen. So I would encourage, nymphs are the ones, if I had to choose, which one to target.
Okay. So we were talking about some of the trade-offs in terms of when we're managing for ecology, especially here in Wisconsin and a lot of other systems now. We're really starting to see the importance of refugia. Especially for our pollinators, invertebrates with fire, and certain timing of warm season, cool season, forbs, those mix and timing to burn. Have you put any of the trade-offs in your study in terms of timing to burn when we're talking about seasonality and potentially looking at some of those trade-offs that we may look at in terms of invertebrate diversity and potential losses of a certain key vertebrate that we're trying to protect?
Sure, yeah. So first, I am going to you're probably going to smile at this. I'm going to say the one phrase that is the most oft-repeated thing of any fire ecologist. We want mosaics. We want to have that kaleidoscope of different. We have areas that are unburned refugia. We have areas that were really scorched with high intensity severity fire. We want areas that were kind of touched a little bit here. We want that sort of like that mosaic, that pattern on the landscape to really serve all these different functions. We want to have areas that escape the fire for refugia. We want to have areas that were roasted to encourage some kinds of recruitment and some animals that need that highly burned areas. And so, like anything, and, we want, that balance is important. And in terms of my own research, so the sites that I am looking at for my research is, I don't want to call it opportunistic, but the places were burned prior to my study in most cases. Sometimes they're being burned now. But I'm really not choosing any of the locations that I'm researching at, burning for the research sake. It's all, these places were burned. This is a great chance to do this study. And so I'm sort of hamstrung by the fact that I can't choose, I want to have 4 replicates of 4-acre areas that are burned in one season versus the other season. We're sort of piecing together what we have and then modeling, in the future, we will definitely consider how seasonality as a covariate, how all these other things could, what the effect they may have on mean abundance in our model to try to tease apart that, because it is really important. It is really significant, likely. My study, the easiest thing for me to tease apart in terms of those characteristics of fires is frequency. That's what I'm most focusing on, because we also have a very limited burn season here in the Northeast. It's tough to burn here because of how humid it is and how wet it is often. So, but to answer your question, it's something I am considering. A lot of these things like size, closeness to edge where I'm getting ticks. A lot of these are going to be covariates or random effects if they fit closer into that.
And kind of, again, kind of on that same idea of mosaic, from a landscape scale, how does, what are your thoughts on maybe the size, configuration, and connectivity of burn patterns and regimes, and how that might have influences in tick populations at a broader scale?
Sure, yeah. So I think that at a broader scale, the more fire, the more the more fire, the better, essentially. One of the things that I'm hamstrung with a little bit, is, well, my partners, the Albany and Brookhaven, they're doing a fantastic job burning. They face some substantial socioeconomic headwinds often that impedes their ability to burn at the scale that they would like to. Especially Brookhaven. And so we're really working on, reintroducing fire into these systems, and we're confronting, legacies of systematic fire suppression and fire exclusion that, you're confronting it all across, the Midwest and Northeast. Looking at the Southeast, where fire has been, the study I was mentioning in Northwest Florida, Georgia, those are really occurring at scale. And those are the landscape scales with like larger, very big continuous blocks of fire. And those you saw, of all the studies I've looked at, the most extreme declines. And so I would, wager that areas that have, areas that are, if you have deer that are living in, if deer ranges are totally enclosed by these burned areas, there's gonna be a lot less opportunities for ticks to get onto them and then, drop off into more burned areas. Whereas if you have like small islands of fire, the deer are not going to just like hang out only in the burn scar, or only ignore the burn scar. They're going to go throughout the range of their habitats. And so here's where that host side of things really gets into play. And, if I could choose to collect one more piece of data for my dissertation research, if I had like another, if I could clone myself for the research season, I would have really loved to invest in some, camera traps and small mammal traps to really quantify that host part of the things. But we live in reality. We only have so many resources and time and money, and so I wasn't able to capture that. But it certainly is important, and that gets to the landscape scale size.
The deer part of it, and that leads me into my next question that I see up at our Tree Haven property, which you see behind us, where we do a lot of burning in our spots. Is are there differences in host-seeking behavior of ticks in basically or unburned and burned areas, or actually should I say deer population? Right. I mean, when we're changing the landscape and travel, what are some interactions potentially that maybe mammal movement or some other wildlife interactions that are happening with tick dispersal?
Yeah. So first, one thing, so a lot of stuff I want to say here for this. That's a great question. I'm writing a note to myself so I don't forget to say this part. So the first thing is there's actually like, just in general, there are different patterns of tick, host behavior. And so when we think about ticks, we often think about what we call questing. That's the term. So sometimes you'll have a tick that will go on a blade of grass, it'll stick its arms out and it'll just sort of, try to grab a host, try to latch onto something. And sometimes they chain themselves together and try to increase their reach. It's wild. And so that's called questing. That's the way they seek hosts. They go onto a piece of vegetation and they try to get what comes by them. Then you have other ticks, which are much more aggressive. That's much passive. Some ticks, like the Lone Star, they are active hunters. So, I'd like to take a poll of the audience, who here breathes? If you raise your hand, well, you are being actively hunted by Lone Star ticks if you are living in an area with Lone Star ticks, because they look for CO2 that you breathe out. They look for heat that you breathe out, and they're attracted to that. So already we have different host-seeking behavior. And the ability of fire to modify that host-seeking behavior is substantial. So if you were able to consume or destroy questing ticks will have less stuff to quest with. If you have smaller vegetation, that limits their ability to quest higher distances. Conversely, it also does. The fire can affect tick host movement. So hosts could choose to, if there is unburned refugia, hosts can flock to the same areas, and then you could have much more dense concentrations of that host in one area. which can very much encourage not even just the spread of vectors like ticks, but also other kinds of infectious organisms. So you could have if you have communicable diseases in wildlife populations, you get all the bunnies together in one little area. Well, then the bunny sickness can get more readily transmitted. So refugia can cause or isolating animals into that kind of refuge, not just fire too, but habitat destruction. If you force all of an endangered species into one area, and then that area gets subject to a pathogen, like for example, there's a rare bunny in New England called the New England cottontail, very very susceptible to a tularemia, which is a tick. It can be transmitted by ticks. It's a bacteria, devastates bunnies. And so you have all the New England cottontails concentrated, and tularemia breaks out, and you have a bad day for bunnies.
Yeah, that is some fascinating research, and I look forward to talking to you more after this because there's a lot more questions I have.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, we've run out of time today, and that's just some great information. I think really fire is going to play a large have a large effect on ticks, and hopefully we can find the right therapeutic dose that benefits a lot of our ecosystems.
Absolutely.
So if I could get you to stop sharing your screen, and I'm going to put up our final screen here. So again, it would be nice to keep this conversation going, but we're a little bit over, and we thanks for everybody who's still tuned in. But unfortunately, again, we've run out of time today, but sincerely thank Sam for sharing his experience and expertise with us today. Please actually take a moment to evaluate today's session so we can improve the series. You can scan the QR code or click the link in the chat to evaluate or on the evaluation link, and this will be posted on our website. So again, we appreciate everybody doing it. So we look forward to seeing everyone again on December 3rd for the 10:30 noon when we're discussing the next generation, basically incorporation of prescribed hire in college curriculum. So we look forward to that. Again, thank you for joining today. And again, Sam, great talk. And everybody, have a great day.